The question has arisen of how in the world do we get this situation where we have a big solid object and we want to carve into it with a tunnel or some other spacer in this case. There's a few little tricks to get this to work. First of all, the object that is big and fat must be marked as having outward polygons. This is very important, otherwise that won't work. A good way to do this is we've got some sample things that are just sort of inward facing cubes. We can mark these guys as outward, but that doesn't do anything. It's just sort of a flag that tells Poseidon how to behave and how to carve the object. But we've also hidden a flip all faces, so if you're working with something else, you can just basically flip it if you just need to kind of try out something. So in this case, if you just do those two things, this guy is a standard Poseidon that is inward facing, and whenever you put an inward facing thing into an outward facing thing, it will basically treat it as if it is a tunnel. It removes the portions that are not inside of the solid object. So it's an easy way to sort of start making, like I could, for instance, make this a little bit smaller. Let's say make it a little bit longer, duplicate that, rotate it sideways, and let's say now slide it backwards. I've got a little T-shaped thing where I could kind of see the camera moving through this giant object that I've got here. In addition to that, a person might have the question of, let's say I wanted to do this, make it really big, let's turn on gizmos. So with gizmos on, you can see that there's technically areas that we have removed any bits that are deleted from the object. What if I wanted to add more? Like I want to now add some solid objects to this. Well, if I duplicate a solid object, I'm like, I want to fill in this space with well, that's going to be deleted because that technically doesn't really mean anything. This is kind of removing stuff. So what we've allowed people to do is a world in which you can turn on layered mode. So layered mode exposes a simple property called layer to most of your objects. When you see this little layer number here, most things are on layer 0. If I put something like I showed you before, if I just put something like that, this doesn't really it doesn't really have an existence. If I put something on layer 500, well, things on layer 500 don't interact with things on layer 0. They're kind of just in their own separate world. So I could then take this guy, get a tunnel, make it really duplicated and make it smaller, put this guy on layer 500. So I can basically have sort of like nested versions or sort of like little islands of Poseidons that kind of exist all within one another. These guys basically just don't really affect the other. There is, though, one property that is a little bit interesting, which is if you put something on the next layer. So these guys are all on layer 0. If I put something on layer 1, I think it specifically adds to objects that are it only exists when it's inside of something else that's on layer 1. So it all depends what exactly you're trying to do with this. But there's all sorts of little quicks and quirks. And if you're having a lot of trouble with this, there is a protrude mode that allows you to kind of modify some things on there. I wouldn't really mess around with that too much unless you read our documentation for that. But for the most part, you can by default, just intersect an outward-facing object with an inward-facing object, and it should sort of give you that sort of a tunnel or a mountain in which we put a tunnel or something through it. If you wanted more custom functionality, then you can turn on layered mode, and you can sort of use sort of the capability of having nested Poseidons within one another, existing in their own separate islands.